Jessie had been preparing for this interview for what felt like her entire life. From the moment she spotted the job listing 3 months ago, she had been laser-focused on landing this position. It wasn't just about personal ambition, it was about survival, about finally being able to breathe without the constant weight of financial worry. For years, Jessie had juggled working long hours in retail with studying at night, scraping together every spare second to pursue her dream of entering the corporate world. She didn't just want a career, she needed it. Her family depended on her. Her younger siblings often looked to her for support, and her aging mother, who had sacrificed so much for them, deserved to retire without fear of how the bills would be paid. This job wasn't just a stepping stone, it was the foundation for a better life for all of them. In the weeks leading up to the interview, Jessie had left nothing to chance. She spent hours polishing her resume, ensuring every word was perfectly crafted to highlight her experience and qualifications. Her evenings were filled with mock interviews conducted with friends, their constructive feedback shaping her answers into concise, compelling narratives. She meticulously researched the company, learning about its values, history, and recent projects so that she could seamlessly demonstrate how her skills aligned with their mission. Each detail had been scrutinized, her outfit carefully chosen for its professional yet approachable appearance, her portfolio organized to perfection. Even the walk to the interview location had been rehearsed a day earlier to eliminate any chance of confusion or delay. Jessie had done everything in her power to prepare, and today, she felt ready. The morning of the interview, she woke early, double-checking her notes and mentally rehearsing her opening statements. Her nerves buzzed with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, but she pushed through, telling herself that she had earned this opportunity. She knew that securing this position could change everything, not just for her but for her entire family. It was all she had thought about for weeks. She left her apartment with determination in her step, clutching her portfolio like it was a shield against any doubts that might creep in. The streets were bustling as usual, filled with people rushing to their destinations. Jessie moved briskly, weaving through the crowds with her eyes fixed ahead. She checked her watch, a habit she'd repeated countless times that morning, and saw she had just enough time to reach the office without appearing rushed. Everything was going according to plan. Her confidence began to grow with each block she passed, and she allowed herself a small smile. But as she neared the corner of a busy intersection, something unexpected caught her attention. A middle-aged man, sharply dressed in a tailored suit and carrying an expensive leather briefcase, was walking a few steps ahead of her. He exuded an air of professionalism that Jessie couldn't help but admire. It was the kind of image she hoped to project herself someday. Suddenly his stride faltered. His polished shoes caught on a crack in the uneven sidewalk, and he stumbled forward, unable to regain his balance. With a loud thud, he hit the ground hard, his briefcase popping open and spilling papers across the pavement. The sound startled nearby pedestrians, many of whom turned to look but quickly continued on their way, too busy or indifferent to stop. Jessie's heart skipped a beat. She slowed her pace, her eyes locked on the man as he attempted to push himself up but failed. His face twisted in pain as he reached for his ankle, and his hands trembled as he tried to gather the scattered papers. He looked utterly out of place, his well-groomed appearance now juxtaposed with the vulnerability of his situation. Passers-by flowed around him like a river around a rock, their hurried footsteps and averted gazes leaving him isolated in the midst of the city's chaos. Jessie froze, torn between two competing instincts. On one hand, the interview, the one she had spent months preparing for, was only minutes away. The office building was visible just a few blocks ahead, and she could almost picture herself walking through its doors, shaking hands with the interviewer, and delivering the performance of a lifetime. Missing this interview wasn't an option. It could be the key to the future she had worked so tirelessly to create. Her watch seemed to taunt her as the seconds ticked by, each one a reminder of how little time she had to spare. On the other hand, there was the man in front of her, clearly in need of help. She could see the discomfort etched into his features as he struggled to get up, and the scattered documents hinted at the importance of wherever he had been headed. Jessie's mind raced. What if this was just a minor inconvenience for him, something he could handle on his own? But what if it wasn't? What if he couldn't stand or had injured himself more seriously than it appeared? The thought of leaving him there, ignored and struggling, made her stomach churn with guilt. She imagined herself walking past, arriving at her interview on time, only to be haunted later by the memory of his pleading expression. She glanced between the man and the office building ahead, her internal conflict mounting. The logical part of her screamed to keep moving, to prioritize her own future, to remember why she had come here in the first place. But her conscience was louder. The idea of turning her back on someone in need was unbearable. Jessie took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She couldn't walk away, not like this. Even if it meant being late, even if it meant jeopardizing everything she had worked for, she knew what she had to do. Steeling herself, Jessie stepped toward the man, setting her portfolio on the ground as she crouched beside him. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently, her voice cutting through the background noise of the city. "Are you okay? Can I help you?" The man looked up at her, his face a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "I think I twisted my ankle," he said, wincing as he shifted slightly. "Let me help you," Jessie offered, her decision now unwavering. She reached for his briefcase and began gathering the scattered papers, tucking them neatly back inside. The man attempted to protest, mumbling something about not wanting to inconvenience her, but she waved his objections away. "Don't worry about it," she said firmly. "Just take a moment to breathe." Once the papers were collected, she offered him her arm to help him stand. The man hesitated, then accepted, leaning heavily on her as he rose. His weight pressed down on her, but she steadied herself, determined not to let him fall again. His ankle was clearly injured, and he grimaced with every step. Jessie glanced around, spotting a nearby cafe with outdoor seating. "Let's get you over there," she suggested, guiding him slowly toward the tables. Each step felt like an eternity, and the clock in her mind continued its relentless countdown, but she pushed the thought aside. Helping this man had become her priority now. When they finally reached the cafe, Jessie eased him into a chair and flagged down a waiter. "He'll need some ice for his ankle," she explained, her tone calm but insistent. Turning back to the man, she added, "Is there anyone you'd like me to call for you? A colleague? A friend, maybe?" The man shook his head. "No, I'll be fine. Thank you." "Thank you so much," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've already done more than enough." Jessie hesitated, glancing at her watch. She was late now, no doubt about it. The realization hit her like a cold splash of water, but she forced herself to smile. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said before turning back toward the street, her pace quickening as she resumed her journey. The interview might be lost, but in her heart, she knew she had made the right choice. Jessie's chest heaved as she finally reached the glass doors of the sleek corporate office building. Her legs burned from the hurried sprint, and a fine sheen of sweat had formed on her brow. She clutched her portfolio tightly, her fingers trembling as she pressed the elevator button, willing the doors to open faster. She glanced at her phone. 12 minutes late. Her stomach churned with dread. In the world of high-stakes corporate interviews, being late was often synonymous with failure. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but none of her preparations had accounted for this. Still, she had no choice but to move forward. Jessie adjusted her blouse, smoothed her skirt, and attempted to calm her racing heart. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Jessie stepped into the immaculately designed lobby of the firm. The receptionist at the desk gave her a practiced smile that faltered slightly when she noticed Jessie's flustered appearance. "Hi, I'm Jessie Miller," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I have an interview scheduled for 10 a.m. The receptionist arched an eyebrow, her gaze flicking to the clock on the wall. "You're late," she said pointedly, her tone professional but cold. "I know," Jessie said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. Traffic was terrible." It wasn't entirely a lie, but she hated the way it sounded. An excuse. A failure to manage time. She clenched her jaw as she saw the receptionist's judgmental expression. "Please have a seat," the receptionist said coolly. "I'll let them know you're here." Jessie sat in one of the plush chairs in the waiting area, her pulse thundering in her ears. She hated this feeling of being on edge, of knowing she had made a terrible first impression before even stepping into the room. As the minutes dragged on, her thoughts spiraled. What if they didn't even let her interview? What if this was it? The moment she lost her chance at the life she had dreamed of? The humiliation of being turned away after all her preparation gnawed at her, making her shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Ms. Miller?" the receptionist called out. Jessie stood abruptly, clutching her portfolio like a lifeline. "You can go in now. Second door on the left." Jessie nodded and walked down the corridor, her heels clicking against the polished floors. She forced herself to take a steadying breath before pushing the door open. Her carefully rehearsed introduction was on the tip of her tongue, but the sight before her froze the words in her throat. Sitting at the head of the long conference table was Mr. Adam, the same man she had helped just minutes earlier on the street. His suit was still immaculate, though his ankle was now wrapped in a makeshift bandage propped on a chair beside him. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from polite interest to unmistakable recognition. "You," he said softly, leaning forward slightly. Jessie felt her knees weaken. She wanted to disappear. I. Her mouth went dry, and her voice failed her. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice suddenly calm and composed. "Please, have a seat." She hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to flee, but her feet carried her forward as if by their own will. She sank into the chair opposite him, her hands gripping her portfolio so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I apologize for being late," she said, her voice quivering. I know why you're late," Mr. Adam interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "There's no need to explain. I believe I owe you a thank you." Jessie blinked, stunned by his words. "Thank you? For helping me earlier," he continued. "It's not often that people stop to help a stranger these days. Most would have walked right by." Jessie's face burned with a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "I couldn't just leave you there," she said quietly, lowering her gaze. Mr. Adam nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I appreciate it. But this is an interview, Ms. Miller, so let's not dwell on that. You've already made an impression." His words gave her a flicker of hope, but the tension in the room was still palpable. Jessie opened her portfolio and began answering his questions, determined to salvage the situation. But no matter how well she answered, she couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that lingered from her late arrival and the unorthodox circumstances of their meeting. As the interview progressed, Mr. Adams' questions became increasingly pointed. He challenged her on her qualifications, her experience, and even her ability to handle high-pressure situations. Each query felt like a test of her resolve, designed to expose any weakness she might have. "You seem very capable, Ms. Miller," he said at one point, his sharp eyes fixed on her. "But tell me, how do you expect to handle the demands of a position like this when punctuality appears to be a challenge for you?" Jessie's cheeks flamed. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I take full responsibility for being late today," she said, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "It's not reflective of my usual work ethic. I strive to be reliable and prepared, and I can assure you that if given the opportunity, I would dedicate myself fully to this role." Mr. Adams' expression remained inscrutable. The silence stretched uncomfortably before he nodded slightly, gesturing for her to continue. The interview finally drew to a close, and Jessie felt emotionally drained. She had given it her all, but doubt gnawed at her as Mr. Adam rose from his seat, extending a hand to shake hers. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Miller," he said, his tone neutral. "We'll be in touch." Jessie left the office with her head held high, though her heart felt heavy. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on her as she stepped back onto the bustling streets. Had she blown her chance? Or had her actions earlier somehow balanced the scales? She couldn't know. All she could do now was wait and hope. As she walked home, her mind replayed every moment of the interview, analyzing her answers and second-guessing her decisions. But beneath her self-doubt, a spark of pride flickered. No matter the outcome, she had done the right thing by helping Mr. Adam. And perhaps, just perhaps, that act of kindness would be the key to unlocking a new chapter in her life. Jessie sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the email she'd just received. Her hands trembled as her eyes scanned the message for the third time, trying to make sense of what it said. It was from Mr. Adams' company, and the words seemed almost surreal. "We are pleased to offer you an internship position." She exhaled a shaky breath, the knot of tension in her chest beginning to loosen. After the late arrival, the grueling interview, and the days spent agonizing over whether she had ruined her chances, this was more than she had dared to hope for. The internship wasn't the full-time role she had originally applied for, but it was an opportunity. A foot in the door. And she wasn't about to squander it. This was her chance to prove that she belonged in this world. A world that often felt impossibly far removed from the life she had been living. On her first day, Jessie walked into the company's towering office building with equal parts excitement and dread. Her nerves were on edge as she approached the front desk, clutching her visitor badge and trying to ignore the weight of the polished stares from the professionals breezing by. Dressed in their designer suits and armed with an air of effortless confidence, they seemed like creatures from a different planet. Jessie, in her second-hand blazer and sensible shoes, felt like an imposter. When she arrived at her assigned department, she was greeted by a young man with a friendly smile who introduced himself as Andrew, one of the junior managers. "You must be Jessie," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the team. We're excited to have you on board." Andrew showed her around, introducing her to the other team members, some of whom nodded politely while others barely looked up from their desks. Jessie quickly realized she was the lowest-ranking person in the room, and in turn among seasoned professionals. She could feel the weight of their skepticism, the unspoken doubts about whether she had what it took to thrive here. The first few days were humbling. Jessie was tasked with what felt like menial work, organizing files, taking notes during meetings, and running errands for the team. She overheard whispers from a few colleagues who seemed to regard her as little more than a glorified assistant. "Why do we even need an intern?" one woman muttered to her desk mate. "It's not like we don't have enough work to do already." Jessie bit her tongue and focused on her tasks, determined not to let their attitudes get to her. She knew she had to start somewhere, and if that meant proving herself through hard work and persistence, so be it. She arrived early each morning and stayed late, often being the last to leave the office. Slowly but surely, she began to understand the rhythms of the company and the dynamics of her team. Then, during her second week, Jessie overheard a heated discussion in the conference room. The team was struggling to finalize a proposal for a major client, and tensions were running high. Jessie lingered near the doorway, listening as they debated how to solve a particularly tricky problem involving market projections. It was clear that no one could agree on the best approach. Unable to hold back, Jessie hesitantly stepped inside. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't help but overhear. I might have an idea that could help." All eyes turned to her, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then one of the senior analysts, a woman named Victoria, raised an eyebrow. "An idea, huh? Let's hear it," she said, her tone skeptical. Jessie took a deep breath and launched into her explanation, outlining a fresh approach to the problem based on a case study she had recently read. As she spoke, the room seemed to shift. Some of the analysts began nodding, while others exchanged thoughtful glances. By the time she finished, even Victoria seemed impressed. "Not bad," Victoria said, a grudging note of respect in her voice. "We'll consider it." That moment marked a turning point. Jessie's idea was incorporated into the proposal, which ended up winning the client's approval. Word spread quickly throughout the office, and suddenly, Jessie was no longer just the intern. People began seeking her out for her perspective, and she found herself included in discussions she once would have been excluded from. Still, not everyone was pleased with her rising profile. A few of her colleagues, particularly those who had dismissed her early on, seemed resentful of her success. One day, Jessie overheard two of them talking near the break room. "She's just lucky," one of them sneered. "If it weren't for Mr. Adams' soft spot for her, she wouldn't even be here." "Exactly," the other replied. "It's only a matter of time before she screws up and shows her true colors." Jessie felt her cheeks flush with anger and humiliation, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't control what people thought of her, but she could control how she responded. Instead of confronting them, she channeled her frustration into her work, doubling down on her efforts to prove that she belonged. Over the following weeks, Jessie's determination and creativity continued to shine. She worked tirelessly on a new project, developing an innovative strategy that impressed even the most skeptical members of her team. When the time came to present her findings to the department, Mr. Adam himself attended the meeting. As she stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding, Jessie couldn't help but think back to the day she had helped Mr. Adam on the street. The irony of their roles now wasn't lost on her. Taking a deep breath, she began her presentation, carefully explaining her methodology and the potential benefits of her strategy. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Mr. Adams smiled warmly, nodding his approval. "Well done, Ms. Miller," he said. "Your work here is exactly what we need." That moment felt like a vindication of everything Jessie had endured, the doubts, the whispers, the endless hours of hard work. She had earned her place, and no one could take that away from her. But Jessie knew this was only the beginning. The corporate world was full of challenges, and she would need to keep proving herself every day. Still, as she left the meeting, her head held high, she felt a renewed sense of confidence. She had been given a chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. Jessie stared at the email on her screen, reading the words over and over to make sure they were real. "You've been selected to lead the upcoming marketing campaign for North Star Electronics." Her heart skipped a beat, and a wave of excitement washed over her, quickly followed by the crushing weight of doubt. Led a campaign? She was still just an intern. This was the kind of responsibility given to senior staff, not someone who had started out fetching coffee and organizing filing cabinets. Her first instinct was to question why she had been chosen. Had Mr. Adam put in a good word for her? Was this another test? The magnitude of the opportunity hit her like a freight train. North Star Electronics was a huge client, one of the firm's most lucrative accounts. Their products were cutting edge, but their brand image had grown stale over the years. This campaign wasn't just about boosting sales. It was about reinventing their identity. The stakes were high, and the pressure was suffocating. Jessie reminded herself that she had earned this chance. Her innovative ideas and relentless work ethic had already turned heads, and now it was time to prove she could handle something bigger. But as she prepared to tackle the project, the tension in the office became palpable. Some of her colleagues were less than thrilled about her sudden rise. "Are they seriously letting the intern run a campaign?" a voice whispered behind her in the break room. "Guess it pays to have Mr. Adam in your corner," someone else muttered. Jessie felt the heat rise in her cheeks but pretended not to hear. The remarks stung, but she refused to let them derail her focus. This was her moment, and she couldn't afford to let doubt, her own or anyone else's, get in the way. She dove headfirst into the project, researching North Star's history, analyzing their target audience, and studying past campaigns to identify what had worked and what hadn't. Jessie's evenings were consumed by brainstorming sessions, where she sketched out ideas on a whiteboard until her apartment floor was littered with crumpled sheets of paper. Her vision was clear. The campaign had to feel fresh, bold, and disruptive. Her breakthrough came late one night as she scrolled through social media, looking for inspiration. She noticed a trend: short, quirky videos with unexpected twists were dominating the platforms. People didn't just want to be informed or entertained, they wanted to be surprised. An idea began to form in her mind, and as she pieced it together, her excitement grew. She would create a series of short, interconnected ads that told a larger story, each one ending on a cliffhanger designed to leave viewers desperate for more. When Jessie presented her concept to the team, the room fell silent. She felt her palms grow clammy as she waited for someone to speak. Then Victoria, the senior analyst who had once doubted her, broke the silence. "Interesting," Victoria said, her tone measured. "But it's risky. What if the audience doesn't connect with it?" Jessie met her gaze, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in her chest. "It's a risk, yes," she admitted. "But it's calculated. This approach taps into what's already working in the market while offering something unique. If we execute it well, it could go viral." Mr. Adam, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. "I like it," he said, his calm authority cutting through the room. "Let's move forward with Jessie's plan." Jessie's relief was short-lived. The real work was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, she poured every ounce of energy into bringing the campaign to life. She collaborated with graphic designers, videographers, and copywriters, ensuring every detail aligned with her vision. Late nights became the norm, and she often found herself alone in the office after everyone else had gone home. Her determination to succeed was unrelenting, but the stress was taking its toll. One evening, as she reviewed the final edits for the first video, Andrew stopped by her desk. "You've got a lot riding on this," he said, his voice kind but cautious. "I hope you're ready for what comes next. If this flops..." Jessie cut him off with a small, strained smile. "It won't," she said, more to convince herself than him. When the campaign finally launched, Jessie's nerves were stretched to their limit. The videos were released one by one over the course of a week, each one ending with a tantalizing clue about what would happen next. Social media buzzed with speculation, and hashtags related to the campaign began trending. But not everyone was impressed. "Too gimmicky," one user commented. "Trying too hard," another wrote. Jessie read every criticism, each one cutting deeper than the last. She tried to remind herself that bold ideas always faced pushback, but the doubt crept in nonetheless. Then, something incredible happened. One of the campaign videos was shared by a popular influencer who raved about its creativity and humor. From there, the momentum exploded. The cliffhangers became a source of widespread discussion, with people dissecting every frame for hidden clues. The final video in the series broke records, amassing millions of views within hours. The office was buzzing with excitement as the results rolled in. Sales for Northstar's products skyrocketed, and their brand was suddenly seen as innovative and cutting-edge. Jessie's creative gamble had paid off in a way no one could have anticipated. Despite the success, not everyone was willing to celebrate her achievement. Victoria approached her in the hallway, her expression guarded. "Well done," she said curtly. "But don't let this go to your head. One success doesn't make you an expert." Jessie smiled politely, refusing to let the remark dampen her spirits. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, her tone neutral but firm. Later that day, Mr. Adam called Jessie into his office. He was seated behind his large mahogany desk, the skyline of the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. "You've done exceptional work," he said, his eyes twinkling with approval. "This campaign has put us on the map in ways we couldn't have predicted. And it's thanks to you." "Thank you, Mr. Adam," Jessie said, her voice filled with gratitude. "One more thing," he added, leaning forward. "You've earned yourself more than just recognition. I'll be recommending you for a full-time position." Jessie's breath caught. After all the late nights, the doubts, and the whispers behind her back, this was the validation she had been waiting for. "I won't let you down," she promised. As she left his office, Jessie allowed herself a rare moment of pride. She had taken a chance, faced the humiliation of doubt and criticism, and emerged victorious. This wasn't just her first big success, it was the start of something even bigger. Jessie stood at the podium, the warm glow of the stage lights washing over her as she accepted the award. The plaque in her hands bore her name beneath the words, "Excellence in Marketing Innovation." Applause thundered through the room as she looked out at the crowd, a sea of accomplished professionals, executives, and industry leaders. Her cheeks burned, not just from the spotlight but from the overwhelming sense of accomplishment mingled with disbelief. Jessie Miller, once the intern who had nervously stumbled into Mr. Adams' office, was now being recognized as a rising star in the marketing world. But beneath the applause and accolades lay a complicated mix of emotions. The journey to this moment had not been easy, and even now, the whispers of doubt and envy persisted. As she stepped off the stage, Jessie overheard snippets of hushed conversations that pierced through the noise. "She's good, but let's not forget she got lucky with that campaign," someone muttered. "Wonder if Mr. Adam had anything to do with this," another voice said, laced with cynicism. Jessie clenched her jaw, the familiar sting of humiliation threatening to dim her triumph. She had heard variations of these remarks ever since her career had started to gain traction. It didn't seem to matter how hard she worked or how much she achieved, there were always people ready to diminish her efforts, attributing her success to luck or favoritism rather than skill. Later that evening, as she sat with her team at one of the tables near the back of the grand hall, Andrew leaned over. "Don't let them get to you," he said, his tone low but firm. "I'm fine," Jessie replied, though her voice betrayed the knot of frustration in her chest. She took a sip of her champagne, willing herself to focus on the people who mattered, her team. They had been with her through thick and thin, their support a constant amid the turbulence of the corporate world. The recognition from the campaign for North Star Electronics had been the springboard for her career. Within months of its success, Jessie had been promoted to a project manager position, overseeing some of the firm's most high-profile accounts. The transition had been daunting, to say the least. She was no longer just responsible for her own work. Now, she had to guide a team, manage budgets, and meet expectations that often felt impossibly high. Some of her colleagues resented her rapid ascent, especially those who had been at the company for years and still hadn't achieved similar roles. Victoria, in particular, had been cold toward Jessie ever since her promotion. At meetings, she often questioned Jessie's decisions with a sharp edge in her voice, her critiques veiled as professional feedback but tinged with bitterness. "Are you sure this strategy aligns with the client's goals?" Victoria asked during one particularly tense meeting. Her tone was neutral, but the implication was clear. She didn't think Jessie knew what she was doing. Jessie held her ground. "Yes, I'm confident it does," she replied calmly, flipping to the next slide in her presentation. "If you'd like, I can walk you through the data that supports this approach." The room fell silent as Victoria hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Jessie's poise. Mr. Adam, who was sitting at the head of the table, gave a slight nod of approval, and the discussion moved on. But moments like these left Jessie feeling drained, the constant need to prove herself an exhausting undercurrent to her success. Despite the challenges, Jessie thrived in her new role. Her ability to think creatively and execute with precision earned her the respect of her team, who admired her work ethic and commitment to collaboration. She went out of her way to ensure they felt valued, often staying late to help troubleshoot issues or personally mentoring junior staff who showed promise. "Jessie's different," Andrew remarked one evening as they worked late in the office. "Most project managers are all about climbing the ladder, but you actually care about the people you work with?" "I couldn't do this without the team," Jessie replied simply. "Their success is my success." Her loyalty to her team didn't go unnoticed. During a particularly grueling quarter, Jessie advocated for additional resources to help her staff manage their workload, even though it meant challenging senior management. When she finally secured the budget approval, her team celebrated like they had won the lottery. But the higher Jessie climbed, the more intense the scrutiny became. At industry events, where she was now frequently invited to speak, she often encountered skepticism from older professionals who underestimated her. "Project manager at her age?" one man scoffed at a networking event. "Back in my day, you had to put in at least a decade before you got a title like that." Jessie smiled politely, refusing to take the bait. "The industry's evolving," she replied. "Opportunities come to those who are ready for them." Despite her successes, Jessie struggled with imposter syndrome. Late at night, as she worked on her laptop in her small but steadily improving apartment, she would second-guess her decisions, replaying conversations and wondering if she truly deserved her achievements. But she pushed those thoughts aside, knowing she couldn't afford to dwell on them. Her breakthrough moment as a project manager came with the launch of a campaign for a sustainable fashion brand. Jessie's idea was to create an interactive digital platform where customers could track the environmental impact of their purchases in real time. The concept was ambitious, requiring cutting-edge technology and seamless integration with the brand's existing infrastructure. Victoria, unsurprisingly, had been skeptical. "It's a nice idea," she had said during a planning meeting, "but it sounds overly complicated. What if it doesn't work?" "It will work," Jessie had replied, her voice steady but firm. "I've already spoken to the developers, and they're confident we can execute it within the timeline." When the campaign launched, it was an instant success. The platform went viral, garnering praise from both the media and environmental advocates. Customers loved the transparency it offered, and sales for the brand surged. Jessie's team was flooded with congratulatory emails, and even Victoria begrudgingly acknowledged the campaign's impact. But the true highlight came when Mr. Adam called Jessie into his office. "You've done extraordinary work," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had once intimidated her. "The board has taken notice. They see you as a leader, and so do I." Jessie's chest tightened. "Thank you, Mr. Adam," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've come a long way since that first interview," he added with a rare smile. "And I have no doubt you'll go even further." As Jessie left his office, her mind flashed back to the day she had helped him on the street, not knowing it would set her on a path that would change her life. She had faced doubt, criticism, and humiliation, but through it all, she had grown. Her career was just beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. Jessie stood at the front of the packed conference room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she scanned the faces before her. The young professionals seated in the room looked anxious but hopeful, their notebooks open and pens poised. She recognized the mix of excitement and uncertainty in their eyes. It mirrored the way she had felt not long ago when she was in their shoes, struggling to find her place in a world that often seemed indifferent to her efforts. Behind her, Mr. Adam cleared his throat and stepped forward. His calm, commanding presence filled the room as he addressed the group. "Each of you has the potential to achieve greatness," he began, his deep voice resonating with authority. "But success doesn't happen in isolation. It's built on opportunities, perseverance, and, sometimes, a little kindness." Jessie smiled as she listened to him speak. The mentorship program they had launched together, the Cycle of Kindness, was more than just another corporate initiative. It was a testament to how one act of compassion could ripple outward, creating a chain of events that transformed lives. Jessie knew this better than anyone. She had lived it. The idea for the program had taken root after Jessie's career began to flourish. The recognition, the promotions, and the accolades were gratifying, but they also made her keenly aware of how easily her path could have gone another way. If she hadn't stopped to help Mr. Adam that fateful day, she might still be struggling to find her footing, her potential overlooked in a sea of competition. That thought stayed with her, a constant reminder of how small moments could define a life. It was during a late-night meeting with Mr. Adam that she finally voiced the idea. "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly, setting down her coffee cup. "What if we created a program to mentor people who are just starting out? There are so many talented individuals out there who don't get the support they need to succeed." Mr. Adam had leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You mean a mentorship program?" "Exactly," Jessie said, her enthusiasm building. "We could offer guidance, resources, and real-world experience. But more than that, we could teach them the value of paying it forward. Show them that success isn't just about personal achievement, it's about helping others succeed too." A slow smile spread across Mr. Adams' face. "I like it," he said. "Let's make it happen." Launching the program wasn't easy. There were skeptics within the company who questioned the return on investment, arguing that the time and resources would be better spent elsewhere. Victoria, predictably, was among the loudest critics. "Do we really have the bandwidth for this?" she asked during a heated planning meeting. "We're already stretched thin with our current projects. And let's be honest, how many of these ments will actually contribute anything of value?" Jessie felt her temper flare but kept her voice steady. "This program isn't just about immediate returns," she said firmly. "It's about building a pipeline of talent and fostering a culture of collaboration and growth. If we invest in people now, the benefits will come." Victoria's skeptical gaze lingered, but Mr. Adams' nod of approval silenced further debate. The program moved forward, and Jessie threw herself into its development with the same determination that had fueled her career. She worked tirelessly to design workshops, secure partnerships with other organizations, and recruit mentors from within the company. The program's launch event was a mix of excitement and chaos. Jessie and Mr. Adam opened the floor with a joint speech, sharing their own stories to inspire the attendees. Jessie's voice wavered slightly as she recounted the day she had helped Mr. Adam on the street, but the emotion in her words captivated the audience. She saw heads nodding and eyes widening as they realized how a single moment of kindness had set her on a trajectory that led to this very moment. But not everyone was convinced. During the Q&A session, a young man in the back raised his hand. "This all sounds great," he said, his tone skeptical. "But how do we know this isn't just another corporate PR stunt? What's in it for you?" Jessie felt the weight of the room shift toward her, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. She met the young man's gaze, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "What's in it for me?" she repeated. "I'll tell you. I was in your position not long ago, struggling to prove myself, unsure of where I fit in. Someone gave me a chance, a real chance, and it changed my life. This program isn't about PR. It's about making sure that chance is available to as many people as possible. Because I know what it's like to need it." The room fell silent for a moment, and then the young man nodded, his expression softening. Jessie felt a small surge of relief. The program had begun to win hearts, but the real test would come in the weeks and months ahead. As the mentorship sessions began, Jessie found herself deeply invested in the men's journeys. She saw glimpses of herself in their struggles, the self-doubt, the fear of failure, the burning desire to succeed. She mentored a young woman named Priya, who was brimming with potential but lacked confidence in her abilities. Jessie worked with her one-on-one, offering guidance and encouragement, helping her navigate the challenges of the corporate world. Meanwhile, Mr. Adam took on a mentee named Marcus, a bright but headstrong young man who had a tendency to push boundaries. Watching Mr. Adam guide Marcus with patience and wisdom reminded Jessie of how he had once done the same for her. The program's impact quickly became apparent. One of the men's developed an innovative social media campaign that went viral, earning praise from clients and elevating the company's profile. Another mentee, inspired by Jessie's story, started a community initiative to mentor underprivileged youth, extending the cycle of kindness even further. Despite the program's success, there were still moments of tension. Victoria remained critical, occasionally making snide comments about the time and resources being wasted on the initiative. But Jessie refused to let the negativity deter her. She had learned to rise above such pettiness, focusing instead on the bigger picture. Months later, during a company-wide meeting, Mr. Adam presented a report on the program's achievements. The data was undeniable: increased employee engagement, improved recruitment metrics, and a surge in positive client feedback. But what stood out most were the testimonials from the men themselves, who spoke about how the program had transformed their lives. Jessie felt a swell of pride as she listened, her mind flashing back to the moment she had first pitched the idea to Mr. Adam. She glanced at him, and he gave her a small, knowing smile. As the meeting concluded, Jessie stepped outside for a moment to take it all in. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. She thought about how far she had come, from the nervous young woman who had hesitated between helping a stranger and pursuing her own dreams, to a leader who had built a platform for others to succeed. Jessie's journey had come full circle, and she knew one thing for certain: kindness wasn't just an act. It was a force, a catalyst for change, and she was determined to keep the cycle going.